Welcome back to the deep dive. If you are listening to this right now, you are exactly who we built this show for.
Absolutely. The learner.
Right, the learner. You are that insanely curious person who just wants the absolute most thorough, fascinating insights from a topic. But, you also value your time. You want a curated shortcut to the best parts of today's source material without that overwhelming dread of information overload.
It's a lot to sift through otherwise.
It really is. And we know you follow these topics closely, so we aren't going to waste your time summarizing the basic plot points you already know. Instead, we have done all the heavy lifting to extract the absolute best nuggets of knowledge and philosophical depth for you today.
And the source material today provides just a truly massive landscape for that kind of exploration.
Oh, massive.
We're looking at the foundational themes within Kristin Dwyer's novel, In Time with You. And since you're already familiar with the text, you know that labeling this merely as a young adult romance is a drastic undersell.
Yeah, it really doesn't do it justice.
Not at all. What we are actually dealing with is a profound, beautifully written exploration of grief, the terrifying butterfly effect of second chances, and the deeply subjective nature of memory. I mean, it's a text that asks us to examine how trauma fundamentally rewires the human brain and alters our perception of reality itself.
Our mission today is to take you through the underlying mechanics of this incredibly unique time travel narrative. We're going to analyze how trauma warps our perspective of the people we love, deconstruct the psychological frameworks of the characters, and deeply explore that age-old, incredibly heavy question.
The big one.
The big one. If you could go back and change your biggest regret knowing the catastrophic ripples it might cause, would you do it anyway?
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we dive into the dense psychology of the narrative, I want you, the listener, to just imagine something for a second. Imagine holding a tangible, physical manifestation of your own life's timeline. Think of it like a physical object that you could unravel with your bare hands. How much of that timeline, how many of those intricately woven moments would you be willing to literally erase and burn to fix one terrible mistake?
That is just wow.
Right. Keep the weight of that hypothetical in your mind as we examine Nieve Monroe's psychological state at the beginning of the text.
That is the perfect framing for Nieve's mental landscape when the narrative opens. Because the story doesn't launch with the magical realism or the mechanics of time travel, it grounds us immediately in the crushing, suffocating weight of survival.
Yeah, we open on that infamous funeral scene.
Right, and the author does something brilliant with the aesthetics of grief here. Dwyer isn't just setting a scene, she is establishing a visual representation of cognitive dissonance.
The imagery there is incredibly striking, especially when we consider the established color theory in literature. I mean, Nieve is attending the funeral of her boyfriend, Carter Delaney, but it's not the gloomy, rain-soaked, cinematic cliché we are conditioned to expect.
No, it's the exact opposite.
It is a lush, beautiful, golden morning. The sky is an aggressive, vibrant blue. The grass is an impossible green. And sitting right in the middle of all this relentless, almost offensive beauty is a shiny black casket.
Just completely jarring.
Nieve is sitting in the car with her cousin, Lyndon, and her internal monologue reveals a fascinating fixation on color. As an artist, she notes that she shouldn't hate any color, but she specifically intensely loathes black and white on this day. She describes black as a color that hides things and takes things.
It took her heart. It took Carter.
Exactly. It's stealing the light from the day.
And that visceral reaction to the colors is a textbook manifestation of trauma-induced cognitive dissonance. The external world is continuing to flourish and be beautiful while her internal world has completely, catastrophically ended. The hatred of black and white is incredibly symbolic.
Yes.
Well, black represents the void, specifically the void of her memory regarding the accident, which we will analyze shortly. White, on the other hand, represents the sterile, forced peace of the funeral. Think about those giant bouquets of white flowers that she explicitly rejects.
She wants nothing to do with them.
She is violently rejecting the performance of grief that society expects from a widow figure. Society demands a quiet, dignified mourning, wrapped in pristine white and somber black. But Nieve's internal state is chaotic, bloody, and entirely unresolved.
I find her behavior at the graveside to be one of the most provocative details in the entire text. Nieve eventually forces herself out of the isolation of the car. She stands at the absolute back of the service, physically and emotionally distancing herself from Carter's family. And when the casket is lowered, she does something so strange and heartbreaking.
The red shoes.
The red shoes. She is wearing these bright red shoes. Now, red was Carter's favorite color. and he gave them to her for Valentine's Day. Nieve actually hated the shoes, but she wore them simply because he loved them. As the casket goes into the ground, she takes off these red shoes and throws them into his open grave. She notes that she is symbolically burying the girl who wore those shoes with the boy who gave them to her.
The psychology of guilt happening in that singular action is staggering. If we look at this through the lens of psychological severing, Nieve isn't just a grieving girlfriend saying goodbye to a token of affection. She is a survivor, suffering from a profound case of survivor's guilt, and she feels entirely, uniquely responsible for Carter's death.
Because they were in the river together.
Right. A rogue current took them, and Carter drowned trying to save her. She is carrying this immense, crushing burden of responsibility. She isolates herself at the back of the funeral because she feels the collective burning judgment of everyone present.
She thinks everyone blames her.
She feels the eyes of the town, the suffocating grief of Carter's parents, and most intensely, the burning hatred of Carter's best friend, Max Emerson. Max is standing behind the family tent, glaring at her, and the crucial psychological element here is that Nieve fully accepts his hatred.
She doesn't fight it at all.
She believes she deserves it because, in her mind, she is the villain of this story.
But the paradox of her self-blame is that she doesn't even have a clear, reliable memory of the traumatic event. She has essentially convicted herself of a crime without actually knowing the details of what occurred in the water.
What's fascinating here is how her brain has responded to the acute trauma of the near drowning. Her memory of the actual event is entirely blocked, which is a recognized psychological defense mechanism known as dissociative amnesia.
Just completely walled off.
Her brain has essentially walled off the horror of the event to protect her psyche from complete collapse. The memory has been replaced by a terrifying void of darkness, punctuated only by fragmented, highly charged sensory flashes. She remembers the visceral shock of the cold water, she remembers a blinding flash of light, and she remembers the physical sensation of Carter's hand slipping from hers.
And his voice?
Yes, the most damaging fragment is his voice saying, "Open your eyes, Nieve." That single line haunts her. It loops incessantly in her mind. Her brain is protecting her from the full horror, but the cost of that protection is that it leaves her trapped in an endless, torturous cycle of questioning.
Was it my fault? Did I pull him under?
Exactly. What were my last words to him? That absence of memory isn't a blank slate. It's a torture chamber where her guilt gets to write its own narrative.
It's an incredibly heavy psychological burden to carry. Following the funeral, and a completely disastrous attempt to return to her college Subtleton Academy of Fine Arts Nieve retreats, she experiences a total functional collapse and goes to the only place she feels any semblance of safety, which is her grandmother's farm. And this brings us to the mechanics of the magical realism in the text, centered entirely around Grandee.
Grandee is a masterclass in character design. On the surface, she is a fantastic eccentric, the grounding force of the Monroe family, who also happens to be a pariah in their small conventional town. But looking deeper, she represents an archetype that dates back to ancient mythology.
The Weaver of Fate.
The Weaver of Fate.
I mean, she is the absolute definition of quirky before we even get to the magic.
Yeah.
She has this flock of sheep, and she's named every single one of them after Gilmore Girls characters. We've got Luke, Paris, Rory, Lorelai, Logan, and Dean. And then there's a rooster named Christopher.
Of course there is.
Right. But beyond the humorous, seemingly trivial naming conventions, Grandee operates under these intense, deeply held superstitions. She treats time not as a rigid linear construct, but as a malleable suggestion. She tells Nieve and Lyndon, "You're not older or younger, you just are."
Which is a beautiful sentiment, but...
To Nieve, who is currently obsessing over every single lost second, every minute she is forced to live without Carter, these sound like frustrating, out-of-touch platitudes. Nieve is anchored to the harsh, immovable, permanent reality of a coffin in the ground, while her grandmother is speaking in philosophical riddles about how nothing is permanent, not even the clock on the wall.
But those riddles are actually the foundational laws of the magical realism that anchors the entire narrative. Grandee's eccentricities are not just whimsical character traits, they are a tangible, disciplined practice. Grandee shears, treats, and dyes wool from her sheep, and she uses this ancient tactile process to explain the mechanics of time, emotion, and destiny. The symbology of the wool in Grandee's dyeing shed is highly specific.
And it directly mirrors the fates.
Right. Yes, the mythological concept of the fates Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos, who spun, measured, and cut the thread of human life.
The dyeing shed is Grandee's sanctuary, her temple, really, When Nieve is forced to dye wool as a way to pull her out of her catatonic, depressive state, Grandy lays out the color theory of their magic. Pink represents deep, enduring love. Yellow represents second chances, a do-over. Blue is a new start, a clean slate.
And black?
Right, black, mirroring these feelings at the funeral, is the couple that steals all the energy from a room and hides the truth. It's essentially a tarot reading, but conducted through textiles. Grandy tells Nieve a crucial rule. You must let the wool choose the color. You cannot force destiny.
But then
Nieve's mother, this highly strung, chronically absent museum curator who is only visiting for the day, accidentally knocks a massive industrial-sized bottle of yellow dye all over Nieve's wool. Yellow, the color of second chances.
And that yellow yarn transitions from a symbol into the physical medium for the story's magic. The author introduces the concept of the blankets of life. The women in the Monroe family don't just knit or crochet as a hobby. They are literally physically stitching the records of their existence. Every single stitch represents a specific moment in time.
It's so tactile.
The colors used, the tension of the yarn, the thickness of the thread, it all perfectly correlates to a specific memory, a visceral feeling, a single day lived. Grandy has a massive blanket she's been working on her entire life, a sprawling tapestry of her timeline. Nieve has one she's been stitching since early childhood. And the ultimate rule of this magic system is profoundly poetic.
The blanket is only finished when they die.
Exactly. The blanket is only truly finished when the person dies. Someone else, a survivor, has to sew in the final binding stitch.
The tactile nature of that magic is fascinating. Your entire life, all your joy and trauma, reduced to a physical blanket you can hold in your hands. So, the inciting incident occurs when Nieve and Grandy sit down by the fire to crochet. Nieve is using her newly spun, aggressively yellow yarn. Grandy, sensing the absolute breaking point in her granddaughter, gently asks Nieve what she really wants.
She offers normal options first.
Yeah, mundane options. Does she want to move forward? Does she want to go back to art school? Nieve finally breaks down, abandoning all logic, and confesses the impossible. She says, I want to go backward. I want to be with Carter again. I just want Carter.
And this confession is the catalyst. This is the moment the narrative transitions from a study of grief into a supernatural thriller. Grandy looks at her, recognizes the absolute unyielding truth and Nieve's desperation, and then commits an act of profound, terrifying magic.
It's so violent.
She reaches over, takes Nieve's sacred blanket of life, and violently, physically pulls out the yarn. She unravels an entire year of stitches. Think about the psychological weight of that action. She is physically undoing an entire year of Nieve's lived experience, pulling apart every single moment she spent falling in love with Carter, every shared secret, every kiss, every fight.
From Nieve's perspective, it is pure sacrilege. Nieve is horrified, screaming at her to stop. Those stitches weren't just yarn. They were her final, desperate connection to his memory. They were the tactile representation of his hand, his voice, their Valentine's Day. And Grandy just ruthlessly rips them out, throws that old, lived-in yarn directly into the roaring fireplace, hands Nieve the new, bright yellow yarn, and gives her a two-word command.
Start over.
Start over. Nieve refuses. She is completely devastated, feeling like her grandmother has just murdered Carter's memory. She runs up to bed, crying herself to sleep. But when she wakes up, the room is wrong. Light is wrong. She is not in her childhood bedroom at the farm.
She wakes up in a sterile college dorm room. Her cousin Lyndon is there, acting completely normal, telling her to get out of bed for her first class, and Nieve experiences utter paralyzing disorientation. This isn't just confusion. She legitimately believes she is suffering a psychotic break induced by her grief.
She asks for Grandy.
She asks about Grandy, seeking her anchor, and Lyndon casually mentions that Grandy is on a cruise.
Okay.
An expensive empty nest cruise because Nieve is finally at college. Nieve checks her phone, and it's not just the date that is wrong. The entire year has regressed. It is September 2nd, the very beginning of her freshman year.
I'm blue.
She hasn't just woken up from a vivid dream. Her entire reality, her very timeline, has been violently reset.
I struggle to comprehend the sheer physiological shock of that realization. Nieve realizes in an instant that if it's the beginning of freshman year, the accident never happened. Carter is alive. Driven by pure adrenaline, she goes sprinting across the campus to find him. She remembers the exact details of their original meeting. She had met him in the student lounge, and he had looked at her with this immediate soul-deep recognition, like she was the absolute center of the universe.
But trauma makes you erratic.
Right. In her frantic, traumatized state, she runs to the registrar's office instead, remembering a glitch with her class schedule from that specific day. And who is the first person she encounters in the line? Max Emerson.
And this encounter is a vital narrative device. It establishes the baseline dynamic between Max and Nieve, but highlights how Nieve's altered perspective changes the interaction. In the original, now erased timeline, Nieve tried to use her status as a legacy student, knowing her family founded the college, to arrogantly cut the line in front of Max.
She acted incredibly entitled.
And Max, who has zero tolerance for privilege, called her out on it immediately, instantly despising her. In this new timeline, the physical blocking of the scene is identical, but Nieve's internal motivation is entirely different. She's not trying to cut the line. She is staring at Max, a boy who, in her mind, has spent the last month glaring at her with pure hatred at a funeral.
Just wants a lifeline.
She is desperately hoping he recognizes her, hoping someone shares her reality. She asks him, "Do I know you?" And Max, just like the first time, is irritated by this weird girl staring at him. But then, rather than engaging, he simply points behind her.
And there he is, Carter Delaney. Alive, breathing. His heart is beating. He's wearing a stupid, faded camp counselor t-shirt that Nieve specifically thought was destroyed. Nieve is completely paralyzed. She lifts her hand to touch him, expecting the magic of their first meeting to replicate itself. She expects him to look at her with that instant magnetic connection they shared the first time.
She expects him to know her.
She expects him to know her soul, to recognize the profound weight of what they have been through, even if he doesn't logically understand it. But Carter just looks down at her with polite, mild confusion. He introduces himself with a generic, "I'm Carter." And because she sprinted across campus wearing these ridiculous floral pajama pants, he gives her a goofy, slightly condescending nickname. He calls her Flower.
The psychological toll of this moment on Nieve's psyche cannot be overstated. We are witnessing the trauma of the reset. From a clinical perspective, Nieve is experiencing ambiguous loss in reverse. Usually, ambiguous loss occurs when a person is physically present but psychologically absent, like in cases of severe dementia.
Wow, that's a perfect way to describe it.
Here, Carter is physically present, perfectly healthy, but the psychological entity that Nieve loves, the Carter who loved her back, is entirely absent. Nieve possesses the intimate, profound knowledge of this boy's soul. She knows his deepest insecurities, his hidden scars, the exact cadence of his breath when he falls asleep. She has stood over his grave and grieved his dead body. And he is looking at her with the blank, polite curiosity that you reserve for a complete stranger asking for directions. It is a profound, reality-shattering violation of her emotional existence.
It's so intense that her physical body actually rejects the paradox. Her nervous system overloads, her vision blurs, the world spins, and she literally collapses. She passes out cold right there on the floor of the Student Services building because her brain simply cannot process the violent collision of her suffocating, unresolved grief with this entirely erased, pristine history.
It's too much data for her brain to handle.
Carter catches her, but ironically, it's Max who sits with her when she wakes up, handing her Carter's water bottle, a water bottle that Nieve knows intimate, everyday details about. It's a waking nightmare brilliantly disguised as a miraculous second chance.
And when Nieve finally regains her senses and processes what has happened, her immediate instinctual reaction is the classic flight response. She realizes she cannot bear the agonizing pain of being a stranger to the love of her life. But more importantly, a protective logic kicks in. She realizes that if she never officially meets Carter, if she never dates him, if she removes herself entirely from his narrative, she can never be the reason he ends up in that river a year from now.
Right, the timeline won't sync up.
She believes she can save his life by erasing her own presence. So she decides to flee. She skips all her classes, gets in her car, and drives straight back to Grandy's farm to escape the timeline altogether.
I understand the instinct to run, but her execution is incredibly naive. When she gets back to the farm, things are deeply, fundamentally, terrifyingly wrong. We get to see the immediate horrific consequences of her timeline deviation. She pulls up to the house, and the porch, a porch which she and Lyndon explicitly remember spending the previous summer painstakingly painting, is peeling, rotting, and entirely unpainted.
A physical glitch.
Grandy is sitting there, and when Nieve desperately asks about the empty nest cruise, Grandy scoffs at her. She asks where on earth she would ever get the money for a luxury cruise. The generational wealth the Monroe family possessed seems to have completely vanished into thin air.
Which is terrifying on its own, but then she goes inside.
Then Nieve walks inside the house, and sitting casually at the kitchen table eating almond cake is a neighbor named June, who famously died 10 years ago. And then comes the most shocking, gut-wrenching glitch of all. Nieve tries to call her mother for help, but her mother's contact is entirely gone from her phone. When she asks Grandy gently, sadly tells her that her mother has been missing since Nieve was 3 years old.
A total erasure.
Let's remember, in the original timeline, her mother was a high-powered, demanding, but very much alive museum curator. Now, because of Nieve's choices, she is literally a cold case missing person.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, these glitches are the terrifying, unavoidable consequences of the ripple effect. Grandy is forced to sit a hysterical Nieve down and explain the rigid, unforgiving rules of time. The analogies Grandy uses here are vital to understanding the philosophical stakes of the entire novel. She doesn't use complex quantum physics, she uses tangible metaphors.
The train in the pond.
Yes. Grandy tells Nieve that time is essentially like a massive train on tracks. It has a predetermined destination, and it possesses a kind of cosmic inertia. It is always trying to correct itself to stay on that original path. But time is also like a still pond. If you throw a rock into the pond, it creates ripples. A small rock creates small ripples that gently lap at the shore, barely disturbing the ecosystem. But if you heave a massive boulder into that pond, it creates destructive, violent waves that swank the shore, uproot the reeds, and alter the entire environment.
And Nieve throwing her red shoes into the grave, or Nieve deciding to completely drop out of college and run away to save Carter, those are massive timeline-shattering boulders. Nieve comes to the horrifying realization that by trying to drastically, selfishly alter her own path to protect the boy she loves, she is actively destroying the established reality of everyone else around her. She has resurrected a dead neighbor, plunged her grandmother into poverty, and completely erased her own mother from existence.
She can't ignore the collateral damage.
She realizes she cannot play God. The ethical burden is too high. She has to return to Subtleton Academy. She has to go through the mundane motions of her freshman year. And she must commit to making only small ripples if she wants to keep her loved ones' lives intact while subtly steering Carter away from his death. I mean, think about the weight of that for a second. Think about how every tiny, seemingly insignificant choice you made today, what time you woke up, what route you drove to work, relies on a fragile, invisible, deeply complex ecosystem of past decisions. If you altered one angry text message from 5 years ago, what pillars of your current reality might completely collapse?
It's a paralyzing thought experiment, and it forces Nieve right back to Subtleton Academy, and far more painfully, it forces her back into Carter's immediate orbit. But this time, the dynamic is entirely shifted. She's an outside observer rather than the center of his universe. And this brings us to one of the most crucial, psychologically complex thematic elements of the story: the complete deconstruction of the perfect boyfriend archetype.
This part is so fascinating.
It is a well-documented psychological phenomenon that grief naturally creates a halo effect around the deceased. When someone dies, especially when they die tragically and young, the survivors tend to unconsciously sanitize their memories of them. We polish away their human flaws, their cruelties, their mistakes, and we remember them as golden, flawless, idealized angels. That is precisely how Nieve remembered Carter.
Yes, her memory of him in the first few chapters is practically glowing with perfection. But the new timeline violently strips away that protective halo and forces her to look at him through an objective, highly critical lens. And the first major crack in the facade of their perfect romance is the introduction of a girl named Alex, Alexandria Moreno.
The girl from the funeral.
Now, Alex was the dark-haired girl sitting quietly with the family at the funeral in the original timeline. Nieve barely noticed her. In this new timeline, Nieve discovers that Alex is a massive, towering, complicated presence in Carter's life. Max actually refers to Alex as Carter's Moby Dick, the great white whale he has been endlessly, obsessively chasing for years. She is a longtime family friend, and Carter's attachment to her is deep and fraught. And the gut punch for Nieve is the realization that she knew absolutely nothing about this girl.
Nothing at all.
Carter had entirely, purposefully compartmentalized his life, keeping this massive, defining piece of his heart a complete secret from Nieve during their entire relationship.
That revelation alone shatters the illusion of their perfect intimacy. If he could hide something that massive, what else did she not know? But the deconstruction goes much further than just hidden secrets or past loves. Nieve is forced to confront Carter's actual behavioral flaws in real time. Flaws that she previously excused, ignored, or actively found charming when she was blinded by young love.
Which leads to the pool scene.
This culminates in a highly distressing, pivotal scene at an underground campus pool. Carter and his privileged group of friends decide to break into this abandoned pool for a late-night swim. In the original timeline, Nieve loved this kind of rebellious behavior. She found it thrilling and jumped right into the water with him. But in the new timeline, Nieve is carrying the fresh, untreated, highly reactive trauma of nearly drowning in a freezing river and watching Carter die.
She is absolutely terrified of the water.
Uh-huh.
She stands at the edge, shaking, and explicitly, clearly tells Carter, no. She refuses to get in. But Carter is presented as this wealthy, charismatic, golden boy who is entirely, fundamentally unaccustomed to hearing the word no from anyone, especially a girl he is flirting with. He sees her genuine hesitation and fear not as a hard boundary to be respected, but as a playful challenge to be overcome.
He's just completely oblivious to her actual state.
He thinks he's being fun, spontaneous, and charming. He physically picks her up against her will, intending to throw her into the deep end of the water. Nieve's traumatized nervous system takes over, and she goes into a full, screaming panic attack. She is thrashing, terrified, fighting him off like her life depends on it, because in her mind, it does.
And the intervention in this scene is crucial. It is Max who steps in. Max physically yanks Nieve out of Carter's grip and aggressively yells at his best friend, demanding that Carter look at her, pointing out that she is visibly terrified and clearly said no. This scene completely shatters the idealized image of Carter that Nieve has been fiercely protecting.
She sees the reality of him.
Nieve is forced to stand there, shivering, and actually see his entitlement. She sees his boundary pushing, his heavy drinking, and his alarming inability to read the emotional needs or explicit consent of the people around him when it conflicts with his own desire for a good time. It raises a profound, unsettling question for you, the listener. Do we ever truly, objectively know the people we love, or do we just intimately know the highly curated, specific version of them that interacts with us?
That is such a bitter, difficult pill for Nieve to swallow. She is dedicating her entire existence, risking the fabric of reality, to actively try and save the life of a boy who, she is slowly, painfully realizing, might not have been the great epic love she thought he was. He might just be a flawed, selfish teenager. And as her perception of Carter shifts and darkens, so does her relationship with her ultimate foil in the narrative, Max Emerson.
The shifting dynamic between Nieve and Max is unequivocally the emotional core of the new timeline. It is a masterfully executed enemies to something else progression. Let's look at the baseline. In Timeline 1, Max was the hostile, deeply grieving best friend. He actively disliked Nieve while Carter was alive, feeling she selfishly monopolized his friend's time and attention. And after the drowning, he openly, viciously blamed her for Carter's death.
They hated each other.
They were separated by a massive, impenetrable wall of mutual resentment and grief. But in Timeline 2, Nieve makes a deliberate, calculated, small, ripple academic choice. Instead of choosing to do an isolated, individual art project like she did originally, she chooses the collaborative mural project, hoping to keep a lower profile. This seemingly minor, insignificant academic pivot forces her into daily, unavoidable proximity with Max, who happens to be the teaching assistant for that specific class.
And their forced proximity isn't just confined to the serious environment of the art studio. Because Nieve was so distracted by the time travel, she missed the initial prime sign-ups for the mandatory Inheritance Committee volunteer hours. Because of this, she gets assigned to work at the absolute bottom of the barrel, the local celestial-themed ice cream shop.
The Big Dipper.
It's called the Big Dipper, and the author uses this setting perfectly to inject some much-needed humor and levity into a very dark story. The shop is ridiculous. The flavors are called things like Asteroid Delight, Sunbeam Vanilla, and Nebula Mandus. Their strict, highly intense friend Benji works there as the manager and takes the job incredibly, hilariously seriously.
He threatens to fire them over ice cream names.
Max, due to his own scheduling issues, is also assigned to this specific orientation. So the two of them are forced to sit shoulder to shoulder in this cramped, brightly colored back room, while Benji threatens to instantly fire them if they dare to call the ice cream by its normal name. It's humorous, yes, but it's also deeply bonding. Removed from the pressure of Carter's orbit, they drop their defensive postures, they banter, they commiserate over the absurdity of the situation, and they form the foundation of an actual, genuine friendship. Nieve has this startling realization that, against all odds, she actually enjoys Max's company. He makes her laugh.
That nascent friendship very quickly evolves into something much more profound and intimate, particularly within the realm of their shared passion for art. There is a beautifully written, highly charged scene in the art studio that exemplifies this. Max is incredibly stressed about his upcoming submission for the prestigious Alumni Festival. He has violently thrown away a sketch in frustration, a detailed charcoal drawing of hands holding an intricate pocket watch.
And Nieve just digs it out of the trash.
Nieve, acting on a brazen, almost inexplicable impulse, pulls the discarded drawing out of the trash. She takes her own pencil and begins to add intricate, deeply personal details to his work. She adds rings to the fingers, she draws fine age lines on the skin, giving the hands a history and a soul. She also writes blunt critique notes directly on the paper, saying things like, "Perspective is hard. Her smile is the most perfect thing here. Don't change it."
It is such an intimate, borderline aggressive violation of his creative space. You just don't touch another artist's work like that. And of course, the worst case scenario happens. The professor, Doc, sees the altered drawing. Doc lavishly praises the piece, mistakenly assuming it was a deliberate, planned collaboration between his TA and his student. This causes intense, explosive friction between Nieve and Max.
Because she exposed him.
Max is absolutely furious, but it's not just because she touched his work without permission. He is furious because her additions effortlessly exposed a raw, bleeding vulnerability that he was desperately trying to hide. Max is deeply, secretly insecure about his technical art lacking emotional depth, and Nieve effortlessly provided the exact emotional resonance he was missing. It strips away his tough, unbothered exterior and forces them to see each other purely, honestly as artists.
And that intense creative intimacy inevitably bleeds into their social interaction, creating a crackling, undeniable romantic tension. We see this brilliantly executed at the Cattle Club bar during a supposedly casual game of darts. They are playing a game called Around the World. The banter is sharp, and Nieve intentionally bumps into Max to mess up his throw. Max retaliates by throwing an ice cube at her. It's flirtatious, it's highly playful, and it serves as a stark, glaring contrast to the heavy, doomed, suffocating feeling that surrounds every single one of Nieve's forced interactions with Carter in this new timeline.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that playful tension culminates at the massive Halloween party. The party is set in this sprawling, dark, intimidating hedge maze. Nieve gets separated from her cousin and sits down on a stone bench, feeling overwhelmed. Max, who is working the party as a scare actor in a terrifying black robe, sees her. He takes off his mask, breaking character, and sits quietly next to her. The imagery Dwyer uses here is so evocative. They share a thermos of warm, mulled wine under a sky dominated by a haloed moon.
The haloed moon is key.
Max looks up and softly tells her that a haloed moon means the universe is actively trying to give you what you want. They sit in the quiet darkness, the chaos of the party muffled by the hedges, their hands brushing every time they pass the thermos back and forth. It is peaceful. It is profoundly safe. And in that moment of safety, Nieve realizes something absolutely terrifying.
She realizes the uncontrollable, compounding nature of the butterfly effect. Think about the architecture of her choices. Nieve's entire singular mission in this timeline is to actively save Carter. She is meticulously trying to orchestrate events, making those small ripples to ensure he is nowhere near the river on the day he is supposed to die. But in making those small ripples to save Carter, she is inadvertently, drastically changing Max's destiny and entirely rewriting her own dynamic with him. By intentionally stepping out of Carter's blinding, consuming shadow, she has stepped directly into Max's steady light. She is falling deeply in love with the boy who, in another life, despised her very existence.
It's a brilliant, agonizing narrative web. And Dwyer weaves these heavy themes of fate, destiny, and the inevitability of tragedy directly into the art the characters are creating. Remember that collaborative mural project Nieve signed up for to stay close to Max? The theme they draw randomly from a hat for their massive painting is William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet.
This raises an important question about the author's thematic intent. The use of Shakespeare here is heavy-handed, certainly, but it is highly effective as a mirror for the character's internal struggles. The narrative uses Shakespearean analysis to dissect Nieve's current predicament without the other characters realizing it. This comes to a brilliant head during a heated debate at the Cattle Club. Carter, trying to be intellectual, asks the table what their favorite Shakespeare play is. Nieve immediately, definitively says Hamlet. Max counters by saying Hamlet is just okay. They immediately get into a fierce, philosophical debate about the core message of the play.
Nieve passionately argues that Hamlet is fundamentally about subjective reality. It's about a man who sees the ghost of his father, a ghost that no one else in the castle can see, and how profoundly isolating it is when your reality, your absolute truth, differs from everyone else around you. She argues that the tragedy isn't the ghost, the tragedy is the isolation. And this perfectly, painfully mirrors her own isolation as a time traveler. She's carrying the ghost of a dead timeline, a dead relationship, and everyone around her thinks she's just a slightly eccentric, traumatized girl.
But Max counters her interpretation.
Right. Max argues that sanity is entirely relative. He says the point of Hamlet isn't whether the prince is clinically insane or a brilliant mastermind playing a game. The point is whether you, as an outsider, have the capacity to believe someone when they express a reality you don't personally understand. Max is essentially arguing for radical empathy, for believing people's truths even when they completely defy logic and the laws of physics.
It is a brilliant piece of character work. It shows how deeply they understand the human condition and how deeply they are beginning to understand each other, even if Max doesn't realize he's actually discussing Nieve's literal predicament. But we must contrast this deep, empathetic, philosophical debate about Hamlet with the actual mural project they are painstakingly painting day after day, Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet is not a play about subjective reality, empathy, or misunderstandings. It is a story about star-crossed lovers who are doomed by an inescapable cosmic fate. The very prologue of the play explicitly tells the audience that the lovers will die. Their fate is written in the stars before the first scene even begins.
And that contrast poses maybe the most important question of this entire deep dive. I want you to really think about the mechanics of time travel we've discussed. Are Nieve and Carter Romeo and Juliet, are they fundamentally, on a cosmic level, fated to end in tragedy no matter how hard Nieve tries to rewrite the script of their lives? If Grandy is right, and time is a massive train endlessly trying to correct itself and get back on its original tracks, is Carter's death the final unavoidable station? Can you actually outrun fate? Or does every single detour you take, every ripple you make, just lead you inexorably back to the exact same tragic ending?
It is the central, agonizing tension that drives the final act of the novel. Nieve is desperately trying to untangle the tightly wound threads of destiny, but every single time she pulls one thread to save Carter, she realizes she is unspooling someone else's life. Her mother's, her grandmother's, Max's. The emotional journey of In Time With You is incredibly profound. It absolutely transcends the standard tropes of a simple romance novel. It acts as a deep, unflinching psychological look at how trauma fractures our memory, how grief isolates us in our own subjective reality, and how the mundane, everyday choices we make are actually the vibrant, crucial yarn weaving the grand blanket of our lives.
Absolutely. The foundational rule of time in Dwyer's universe is strict and unforgiving. You cannot surgically erase a tragedy without also erasing the immense beauty that grew alongside it. Nieve learns the hardest lesson of all, that you cannot remove the painful, devastating parts of your history without losing the profound human connections that were forged in the fire of that exact pain. By trying to undo the worst day of her life, she inadvertently undoes her own mother's existence, she destroys her grandmother's security, and she threatens the deep, complex, healing love she is discovering with Max.
Which brings us to a final, lingering concept. Something built directly upon the foundation of the source text, but left for us to truly mull over long after the book is closed. Throughout this entire agonizing journey, Nieve's singular driving goal has been to keep Carter away from that river, to ensure he lives. But let's follow the cold logic of time travel to its ultimate devastating conclusion. If Nieve fully succeeds and Carter never goes near the water, he lives. But he survives as a boy who never fell in love with her. He will be a boy who never shared those intimate late-night secrets, who never gave her those ridiculous red shoes, and who never sacrificed his own life to pull her from the current.
The Carter she loved, the Carter who loved her, died in that river. The Carter who lives in this new timeline is fundamentally a stranger with his face. So I leave you with this. If you go back and change the past to save the physical life of the person you love, but the mechanics of that change completely, entirely erase the version of their soul that loved you back, did you really save them at all? Or do you just replace the love of your life with a living ghost? It's a devastating, heavy thought to leave you with, but exploring the depths of these realities is exactly what we do here. Thank you so much, learner, for joining us on this deep dive. We hope we've given you some incredible, profound insights to carry with you. We wish you the absolute best as you carefully navigate the ripples of your own timeline, and we will see you next time.